You are just laying there. You've been laying there for a while. Well, I'm gonna do something about it. Here we go.
Hi everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music
nerd, and it's time for an album review.
White Suns Sinews. White Suns is a Brooklyn noise punk trio, and this is their sophomore LP. It's out now on Load Records. It's about 6 tracks, lasts around 30 minutes, and despite the brevity, it is a very intense listen. Now, despite this being noise rock, noise punk, it's not really your very rockin', riff-heavy, catchy, blood-pumping side of this style of music. White Suns is much more heady, much more artsy, not really looking to rock you, but instead perform brain surgery on anyone willing to listen to their music through the ear canals, with tons of ear-piercing guitar feedback, improvised drums, and some very disturbing, abstract lyrics. If I had to boil this album down to a phrase, it's kind of like a really raw, chaotic noise rock poetry slam. And for a 3-piece that is guitar-based, they come up with some pretty interesting sounds. There are lots of low-end drones, feedback that flies in at various pitches. There are some sounds that I'm not even sure how these guys are even making them, to be honest. Like on the song CENOTE, where there's this guitar kind of hanging in the left channel that's like... It kind of brought me back to the first time I heard Health, another noise rock band that is much catchier than White Suns by comparison, but I was pretty perplexed by a lot of the sounds they were producing too. Either I'm perplexed by the sounds of a given track, or I am just so in love, infatuated with how jagged and how angular some of the songs these guys write are. The opener of this album, Fire Sermon, just burns and sears with all these layers of feedback that are constantly changing. The track, even though it is not really putting forth any real constant drum beats or a groove or a rhythm, a pattern or anything, it just stays so tense. And the song eventually explodes into this flurry of very tight, blazing drums and quickly strummed guitars whose chords I think are in like the key of Z. The next track has these floor tom drum rolls that I love that are constantly speeding up or slowing down. And there are these very twittering guitar noises that make me think of like metal hitting glass or like a swarm of spiders heading toward me or something. It creeps me out just thinking about it. The track Footprints Filled, the third song on here, is easily the most rocking on this entire thing. It just has these relentless syncopated drum and guitar chords just hitting together over and over and over and over. It is like getting bashed over the head with a hammer until your skull caves in. One thing I do think is kind of exceptional about this record is the band is always changing the shapes of its riffs. Or they're building a song up, they're winding it down. There's always some kind of shift going on. They're basically saying, hey, you know what? Screw traditional song structures. Screw choruses and refrains, we don't want any of that. But even though these guys are really working hard to be outside of that structure, they do organize their songs. White Suns really places all of its ducks in a row on a lot of these tracks, with some very clear and impressive transitions linking one section of a track to another. I like the feeling of intensity. White Suns has that, but I also like the feeling of progression, of going somewhere, and White Suns has that as well. However, I'm not saying this album is going to be a walk in the park. It may not necessarily click the first time around. It didn't with me, but the sounds were so interesting that I continued being intrigued and wanting to return to this album, because I've been listening to it on and off for a little bit. So though it may not all appear in a really obvious way at first, there is a method to the madness of these songs. And if you want to talk about madness, the vocals on this album are pretty maniacal. pretty twisted. Now, I can't really say, hey, on this track, the vocal delivery was especially maniacal. No, I can't say that because that's the case with every single track here. I do wish the vocals did present a little bit more variety. Either you're hearing these really extreme, ragged screams or a very kind of deadpan narration. But despite the fact that I may have wanted a little bit more, these two, styles do match what's going on with this album very well. The song Temple picks things up with this really kind of slow, crushing groove. Bam, bam, bam. I kind of imagine in my head that this is what it's like to be very slowly eaten alive by something that is around 2 or 3 times your size with these giant metallic guitar cord teeth crushing down on you with every bite. The closer is great too, with these very kind of primal drum beats that to me just stopping and starting and stopping and starting, and then eventually it just kind of all ends as the big fat noisy broken sounding bell kind of clang clang. Even though it is noise rock music and sounds very modern, there's something so kind of ritualistic and ancient about this particular track. I did come out of this thing with a few gripes. I do feel like the production, the recording on this thing could have been better, could have added to the intensity of this album a lot. I do think White Suns is sounding better than ever. Their production, their recording is definitely of a higher quality in comparison with their first album. The sounds are definitely brighter, more resonant, bolder, but the vocals were a little more distanced than I would have liked them to be. The drums were much more distanced than I would have liked them to be. They kind of sounded like they were recorded with 2 or even 1 microphone placed far away from the drums, just with a lot of ambient noise and everything, but the guitars felt so close. This album just has an incredibly dark and sick energy to it that I love, that I think has made a lot of the best noise rock records out there great. I'm not necessarily saying this is one for the history books, but this was definitely an incredibly solid listen with some great songs that I'm going to remember by the end of this year, and a nice little detour, a nice noisy detour for me in my listening trajectory. Kind of feeling a strong 7 to a light 8 on this thing. What did you guys think of it if you've heard this album? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Why? And what should I review next? Anthony. Forever.